Hello, friends. My name is Ismail Shahtakhtinski. I'm the immigration attorney, principal attorney at I.S.Law Firm. We've had live streams on other channels, but this is our first live stream on our YouTube channel. So you can post questions here. I'll do my best to answer. I have an assistant who is duplicating the questions so I can answer as much as I can. Thank you for listening today. Today is November 23rd, the day before Thanksgiving. So I hope everybody has wonderful Thanksgiving tomorrow and then Black Friday and a nice long weekend. So the first question that I received here is, how can I sponsor my parents to move to the United States? This is a very frequently asked question about sponsorship because everybody is familiar with the process of sponsoring immediate family members, such as children or spouses, but not so much about the parents. So the first thing to know is that the process of sponsoring parents for US citizens is just the same as sponsoring the spouse or child, because the parents of US citizens are considered immediate family members, and there is no quota, there is no visa caps. The process goes as smooth as the marriage-based reunification process. If the parents are in the United States, you can file for their adjustment of status together with a petition here in the US, and they can remain in the US. In fact, they will be stuck in the US for some time until they receive travel authorizations. The process in the US takes close to about 1 year or less. Currently, the USCIS has been trying to approve adjustment of status cases without interviews, and therefore they're now getting faster, approving these cases faster. But if the parents are outside of the United States, then the process goes through 3 stages. First, the petitioner would file the petition here with the USCIS in the US. And once the USCIS approves that petition, which currently takes about 6 to 8 months approximately, again, it varies significantly. It can vary significantly from time to time, but it currently takes about 6 to 8 months from the time the petition is filed here in the US. But that's only the first stage of the process. The second stage of the process is that the USCIS will forward the case to the State Department National Visa Center, which asks for additional documents and forms. And once those forms and documents are uploaded to the National Visa Center's portal, then the National Visa Center forwards the case to the U.S. Consulate, which is the third stage of the process. The U.S. Consulate schedules an interview. The applicant is notified, the petitioner is notified, and then there are additional documents that need to be prepared for the interview and the medical examination. The report has to be obtained, and once those are done, the beneficiary goes through the interview process, receives 6 months immigrant visa stamp in the passport. It's valid for 6 months for that beneficiary to enter the United States, but once he or she enters the US, they automatically become permanent residents in the United States. And the green card will arrive in the mail within approximately a couple weeks after their arrival in the US. Sometimes it may be slightly delayed. So the process of sponsoring parents is very similar to sponsoring spouse. The second question I have is, what makes an asylum case weak or strong? It's a very interesting question. So there are obviously, statutory bars to asylum that, make the case weak. I'm not going to talk about those because everybody's familiar with, criminal background or 1 year deadline for filing asylum and so on. I'll share with you, based on my experience, things that people did before applying for asylum that made their case weaker, or things that they didn't do that should have done during the handling of their case. One of the things that comes to my mind first is filing a bare asylum application form. Basically, filing the I-589 without any supporting documentation or declaration, with the hopes to supplement this down the road when the interview is scheduled or when the court date is scheduled and so on. The reason why lots of applicants do this is to start their asylum clock going as soon as possible so that they can become eligible for employment authorization document after they file for asylum, 5 months after when they can file application for employment authorization. But the downside of filing it early without sufficient supporting documentation is that that case is looked down upon. So unfortunately, there are many asylum applicants that file asylum applications with no real basis, just for the purpose of getting EADs, employment authorization documents. Or there are some asylum applications that people file and then they come up with stuff with basis, and then they come up with documents. They either pay, get forged documents, and so on. And this is very obvious. And once the USCIS sees a bare bone application with no supporting documentation, or sometimes even without a declaration attached to it, then it becomes suspicious, the reasons why this was filed, and without any supporting information or documentation. So that's one thing that I usually don't recommend. And as a rule, as a policy in our firm, we make sure that we collect all of the supporting documentation as much as possible, including witness statements, affidavits, and so on, and prepare a very thorough declaration and file it with the USCIS all at once. The other issue with sending a quick and random application with random declaration is that whatever you send to them sticks with your case forever. It's not that you can send a declaration today saying, this happened to me, and then down the road supplement and say, no, this didn't, but the other thing happened, or ABC happened, but now you're saying also there were other incidents which you didn't describe in your first declaration. That significantly weakens your case. So therefore, from the beginning of your case, make sure you prepare a thorough application, thorough declaration, and thoroughly gather evidence which you need to file upfront with the USCIS. And there is also this wrong understanding that you can file an asylum application with the USCIS, give it a try. If not, then you have a second chance in immigration court, which is true. You have a second chance, but it's not the second chance in a sense that it's easy, it's not fast, and plus whatever you filed with the USCIS is going to be reviewed and considered at the second chance in immigration court. So it's best to prepare everything very diligently and carefully and thoroughly. The second thing that I often see is some people, maybe it's because of the naivety or because they have to, or any other reasons, they come to the US, they visit the US several times before they actually file for asylum. So they go back and forth. And sometimes they even consult with me and they say, oh, I have this basis for asylum. Should I file it? I'm planning to go back and return and do something, or sell my car, or do something else, and then I'll come back and file for asylum. And I tell them, well, how come? I mean, if you're applying for asylum, if you're stating that you cannot go back to your home country, and this is your chance to apply, you're here now, why would you go back? So each time an applicant returns to their home country voluntarily for any reason, that creates question. It doesn't mean that it automatically bars asylum, but it creates unnecessary questions. So if you can apply for asylum while you're in the US before going back and forth, then that's the better chance. Now, the arguments against those questions could be that, how come you went back to your home country? The argument can be that things happened to me after I went back. So somebody may have visited the US for a visit, then went back and then spent another 6 months or a year or more. Some visitor visas are valid for 10 years for some countries. So, things might have happened between those two visits. But the bottom line is, in the asylum application, you have to indicate every visit to the US, and the questions come up that you visited US before, or not just the United States, some other countries before, and why didn't you apply? The other issue that I see often is asking for expedite requests. So as we know, the asylum applications take a long time until the interview is scheduled. The USCIS is severely backlogged. Some of the applicants wait for years for their interviews. And there is a process to ask for the interviews to be expedited. Um, and sometimes, a lot of times, I get our current clients, we have hundreds of cases that have been pending for years. Sometimes they get anxious, they contact me and say, can we place an expedite request? Or sometimes we have new clients who have pending cases, they want to hire us to ask for expedite. Uh, and in the process of expedite request, some of the applicants are approaching it a little bit loosely in terms of the actual proof of the reasons to expedite. Um, and I tell them that, look, you're sending this request to the same place that will be considering your entire asylum case. And if you make some baseless arguments to place your case ahead of everybody else, then you are damaging your credibility. And a lot depends on your credibility. So when you have an asylum case pending with the USCIS, you have an asylum officer who's going to be considering your case, your credibility plays significant role. So if if you're put 100,000 cases behind mine, put me ahead of everybody else, and you're bringing some bogus reasons to do that, that's going to stick with your case. Even if they grant that expedite or deny that expedite, that's still going to be, something that they may consider. I'm not saying they will consider in every case, but they may consider and hold it against you if you're making ridiculous arguments. I always tell my clients, sometimes they say, I want to be heard first. This has been 5 years and so on. I say, okay, here's the deal. Imagine you're at the airport. There are 500,000 people in front of you, and you're telling everybody to move aside so that you can go first. You better have some strong, urgent, emergency reasons to do that. Otherwise, everybody's going to laugh at you, and they'll consider you not credible or ridiculously minded person asking everybody to move aside just because you're impatient, because you want to be heard first. Same thing applies here. If you're asking asylum office to move every case aside and have your case heard because you're tired of waiting, that's going to be looked down upon, and that's not going to work very well for you. The other obvious thing that makes asylum case stronger is hiring a competent attorney to help your case. And if we look at just statistics, the Syracuse University maintains statistics of asylum cases, the judges, the rate of grants, and so on. But they also have statistics of represented, unrepresented cases to see, what percentage of the asylum cases are granted when the applicant had a lawyer versus not. And just looking at the rough statistics, and I'm not even talking about the competence or the knowledge or experience of the lawyer. I'm just taking as a bulk, just looking at rough mathematical numbers. You have mathematically roughly about 2 times higher chance of getting your asylum approved if you have a lawyer. Again, just by virtue, if we take it as a bulk of statistics, having an asylum and immigration lawyer representing you increases the chance statistically by 2 times. So 2 times more chances of getting asylum approved. But of course, it's not only that, you also want to increase your chances even higher by finding the right lawyer. And that's one of the other things that I see, makes your case stronger or weaker is having an immigration lawyer handle your case is not a check mark. Just having a lawyer, again, we're looking at statistics, but it also means statistically, most of the lawyers are actually doing a good job. But there are some law firms and lawyers that will just, they're sweatshops. They'll just fill out your forms and file it, and that's it. And they're not really doing much. So when you hire a lawyer, one of the things that you can do to increase your chances of asylum is find the right lawyer. And what it means is, look at their, first of all, reviews, look at the information about those lawyers, how dedicated they are, what other clients. And when I say look at the reviews, I don't mean just look at the 5 stars and so on. It's there are ways to manipulate that one way or another. But look, read the substance of the reviews and see how responsive this lawyer, what other clients are saying about this lawyer in terms of their dedication and personal attention to the case. Sometimes I get contacted by some other lawyers from other jurisdictions saying, "Oh, my client has this interview at the asylum office. Can you attend this interview?" And I'm like, "I would be glad to, but I'll have to learn a lot about the case." And it's not going to be a $500 gig because I don't feel comfortable going to the asylum interview without knowing ins and outs of the case all the way. And I am kind of a little bit also, hesitant to do that because I don't think that an asylum client should be represented by a lawyer who's not planning. I mean, I understand there are situations that who's not planning to attend the interview, I was trying to say, but I understand situations there may be conflict in the dates, the availability, and so on. But what I see, unfortunately, some law firms, they're taking cases, they're just filling out the forms, filing it, and then when the interview comes, the client is on their own. And what's the point of having this lawyer? So finding the right law firm, right lawyer is important. Also important is to listen to the advice of the licensed professionals. I'm not saying that they may not be wrong, they may be, but there are much less chances. Just like if you have, if you need medical advice, you'd probably go to a doctor. If you need to, build a structure, you need an engineer, an architect, so that it doesn't collapse on your head. The same way here is, the worst thing happens, and quite often I see people come to consultations because they failed in the first stage of the asylum case just because some friend told them that do this, I did this, and it's going to work. And just like as I said, if your friend tells you do this and you will be able to build a house which will not collapse on your head, you're probably not going to do it. Or somebody just survived the 5-story fall from the building doesn't mean that it's a good idea to do so. So well, I guess what I'm trying to say is that try to maximize your chances by listening to professional advice rather than random advice of people that either think to themselves or use you as a trial of their thoughts. They say, "Oh, if you do this, this is going to work," and then you're basically guinea pig for them to see if it's going to work, if they're smart enough or not. The other thing is, that makes asylum case stronger is using circumstantial evidence. What I mean by that is that anytime you're trying to prove something, there is a direct evidence, there is circumstantial evidence. For example, if you're trying to prove that in your asylum case that you were interrogated, beaten up, and then detained, um, and then you were physically harmed, what could be the direct evidence? Of course, the video of this occurring, but it's such a cliche and it's also very rare that there would be any video or photograph of this actually happening. It's probably not only rare, but it's probably not possible. Nobody's going to video police officers unlawfully beating you up. But I see that. I mean, I see sometimes I have clients bringing me photographs of them being detained and in handcuffs, and the police officer is posing together with them. I mean, it's such a cliche and it's so suspicious. I mean, these immigration officers and judges are not idiots. They know that in most of these third world countries where most of the asylum applicants are from, you can bribe the police officers to dance for you or do acrobatic shows. So it's not unusual to get someone in the police uniform, whether they have a general's rank or major or whatever, then they'll do this. I mean, they'll do many things in those countries for money. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that don't try to don't forge any direct evidence. And similarly, that people get medical reports saying that they were hit, punched in the head or face without any severe consequences. It's also suspicious. I mean, you don't go to a doctor just because somebody slapped you in the face. You may, I'm not saying it's impossible, but at the same time, it kind of becomes also suspicious. But the circumstantial evidence is something that you can gather after the fact. You can collect letters like witness statements. And again, circumstantial could be anything. Like, for example, if you were called to the police station, somebody called you on your phone, on your cell phone from an identified number, and I'm just bringing you an example, and you've been invited to interrogation to the police station, and then if you have that missed call or the call on your cell phone, maybe you can take a screenshot. In some cases, you can actually video record somebody telling you that they're afraid to give you evidence, or audio record them and then transcribe it and then provide it. So there may be lots of, you can just imagine, there are so many different circumstantial types of evidence that you can use for in support of your asylum case, and sometimes those are more effective than direct evidence. And finally, the one of the things that I wanted to say about the asylum cases is making it weaker or stronger is using experts. Lots of applicants, they neglect to use country condition experts in their cases, or they use them wrong. The country condition experts are not just experts on the country conditions, but the expert has to render his or her opinion about your case. So sometimes what I see as a country condition expert is used, it's just an expert who's basically saying, yes, things are bad in this country and this is what happens and so on. No, the expert has to apply the country conditions to the facts of your case and render an opinion, and be upfront and insistive on the opinion. So that's another thing that is quite often not used, or sometimes I see that experts are not even used in the case. If the case is not as straightforward as there is a war or ethnic conflict going on, and it's clear that this is ethnic-based asylum, then expert is useful if it's not that type of straightforward case. And a lot of times those are like corruption, the countries where you have political opinion, which is not a straightforward political opinion. It's not traditional political opinion where the applicant was a member of opposition, participated in protests and so on. Then expert is extremely useful. So those are the things from experience that I see in the cases, that could have been prevented or could have been done otherwise to make your asylum case stronger or weaker. Now, one of the most traditionally probably spoken about things to make that people think that makes their case stronger or weaker is changing the jurisdiction of their asylum case. What it means is that moving from one state to another, because the ratings of the judges in one state is higher than the judges in another state. And that is not always true. Even though, as I said, that Syracuse University maintains the statistics, but it doesn't mean that the statistics apply to your case. What I mean by that, so for example, we have some of the immigration courts which have a significantly higher rate of asylum denials. But your case, now the reason why they may have this significant rate of denials is the type of cases that those immigration courts have. So, for example, some of the courts have primarily immigration cases from Latin American countries where lots of applicants are coming to the US for economic reasons, and they may not have real basis for asylum. There is not really, I mean, I'm not saying there is not, but it's just strictly looking at the volume of cases they have from those countries, and a lot of the arrivals from those countries are for economic reasons, then the rate of the denials is higher. By volume, by number of cases granted, probably Latin American countries get a lot more higher number-wise cases approved than many other countries. But if we look at the percentage, because of the volume of people coming here from those countries for economic reasons, which is not basis for asylum, their rate is higher. So if you have a case, for example, in one of those courts or in front of the judges, and judges also get assigned different types of cases. So if you have a case in front of the judge that had 50 cases from Latin America before your case, and now you're coming from some kind of Eastern European or Central Asian country and you're asking for asylum, that might be actually better because that judge might be more interested in your case and more motivated to approve your case. And that judge actually, despite of the percentage of the approvals or denials, might be not a bad judge at all. So I'm not saying there is no personal prejudice between the judges. There is, just like every other human being. Somebody has their own preconceived thoughts about one country or even just the system of asylum. I don't think that kind of person should be a judge if they have preconceived notion. I mean, beliefs about anti-immigrant or pro-immigrant. But unfortunately, there are. So. But even the Syracuse University, if you look at that website, um, there is information about one of the judges which had like 90% of the denial rate in one court that he worked, and then he had 80% or so approval rate when he moved to another court because of the types of cases. Okay, let me see what other questions we have. Let me see. Okay. I see. Oh, there are lots of questions. Okay. I was looking at the wrong chat. Again, as I said, this is our first live stream, and I was looking, I had to switch the chat. I thought I didn't have much more questions. Can we seek asylum if we came with F1 visa? Yes, you can seek asylum no matter how you entered the US. Even if you jumped off the plane with parachute, you can apply for asylum. Anybody can apply for asylum, even if you dug the hole under the border, if you used fake passport, if you entered with F1, if you just showed up here in the US somehow, you can still apply for asylum. The key for applying for asylum is the 1-year deadline. Well, of course, you have to have basis, but you also have to have 1-year deadline, apply within 1-year deadline. Now with F1, that's an exception. So if you have a valid status, F1, and you never violated it, meaning you didn't work without authorization and so on, then you can apply within 6 months of ending of that status. So let's say if you're on F1 and your service got terminated, you basically have the law says, the precedent say, the law says that it has to be filed within a reasonable amount of time after the change of circumstances. But the BIA, Board of Immigration and Appeals precedent says that it has to be filed within 6 months of that change of circumstance. So if you're on F1 and you've been here for 3 years, 4 years, well, no matter how many years, and now you lost your F1, you have roughly about 6 months to file for asylum. Do immigration officials look at applicants' social media profiles? Well, there is no rule for or against it, but imagine you are an immigration official and somebody's applying for asylum and you're considering their case. You might be curious and look at their social media, especially if the asylum case says that in this, I made posts in social media and so on. I mean, I personally look at social media, so why not immigration officers? They're not officiating it that they are looking at social media, but that would be dumb not to look at social media. What are my options if my case is stuck at USCIS or the State Department? Well, make inquiries. Then there are ways to make inquiries. I'm not going to go into too great details of this because it will take a lot of time. And then you can also contact the USCIS Ombudsman. You can go online and look for that information as well. Then contact your congressman or senator and make inquiries through them. So most of the time it's this. Now, there is also this final result, which is filing a lawsuit in federal court, which is called mandamus action. It's expensive, it's effective in some cases, not all of the cases. And it also depends on whether you qualify, the type of case qualifies, and whether it has been stuck sufficiently long so that the federal court can actually intervene and order the USCIS to take action or State Department to take action. Now, there have been significant delays due to the pandemic, and that's not fault of the USCIS or DHS or the State Department. So I think the federal courts, federal judges might be a lot more lenient to allow USCIS to take its time to review your case because of the delays due to the pandemic, budget issues, and so on. But other than that, yes, there are those means or methods to try to unstuck your case. What's about the asylum processing time and backlog? So that's always a question to ask about asylum backlog and processing time. So, and I always try to give the full answer, explaining the full background so you understand what is going on and you understand what it might be going on in the nearest future. So here's how these backlogs progressed. In the past, I'd say about 10 years or more ago, the asylum cases that we filed, by regulation, they would be scheduled for an interview within 45 days. So from the date of we filed, within 45 days, we'd have an interview, and within 2 weeks, the decision would be made. So by regulation, 60 days was the asylum decision. It's still the regulation, but it's impossible to hold on to. And then things started happening. Previously under Obama administration, one of the things was that the federal government, the Congress didn't pass the budget. The federal government was shut down. Lots of these asylum cases, because they are humanitarian, there are no filing fees paying for the asylum cases. Lots of these cases got stuck because there was not enough budget, not enough officers, or even the federal government was shut down for some time. So the backlog started growing. And then around that time, the wars in Syria, and some other parts of the world, the civil strife and the economic difficulties all over in Latin American countries. So it was the crash of 2008 and so on. And then, lots of individuals came here and applied for asylum. So the asylum applications, first, the volume increased and the budget and the officers. So the backlog started accumulating. So the interviews turned from 45 days to, 6 months to 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 6 years. We have cases now that we filed in 2015, which is now 7 years from now, that are still pending. So things got really bad. Then under Trump administration, part of it got even worse because of the mismanagement. Again, some of the budget issues and so on. But then Trump administration tried to put an end to endless filing of baseless asylum cases. What I mean by that is that since those asylum cases got stuck and backlogs increased, some of the applicants began taking advantage of it, filing asylum applications without basis, hoping just to legalize here, because once you file for asylum and wait for the decision, you are lawfully present in the US. Plus, you get a work permit. 6 months later, you can receive the work permit. So lots of applicants began taking advantage of these backlogs and filing frivolous asylum applications just to be eligible for work permit and to stay here, thinking that, with a backlog, there is 5-6 years of wait time anyways for the interview, so I'll figure something out. Some would get married, some would just go back in those 5-6 years, or some would find some other ways to adjust status or so on. So to prevent that from happening, the Trump administration began reviewing the newly filed asylum cases from 2018. They instituted to review the newly filed asylum cases much faster. So keeping those previously filed in the backlog of 5-6 years, but considering the newly filed asylum cases within, 21 days, I believe. They said they would be scheduling, or 30 days or so on. And it worked in the beginning. They allocated officers, and most of the resources were dedicated to those new cases. All of the new cases filed in 2018 and after would be considered scheduled for interview much faster. But even that failed because first up, the previous backlogs got even worse, and then they couldn't keep up with the new policy, and it didn't really reduce the number of the new applicants because by the time it caught up, for many reasons. So then 21 days turned into 2 months, 6 months, 1 year, and lots of cases gradually began falling into that significant backlog. So it got worse and worse, but to this day, they are trying to schedule interviews faster for the new cases. Now, for the old cases, I should say that about cases that we filed in 2015-16, they gradually get scheduled randomly. There is no specific idea of how and why they're scheduled in one case before the other. The asylum office division, we have quarterly meetings with them, and they're claiming that it is, there is some kind of system utilized, but as many of my colleagues would agree, a lot of times it's just random. I mean, some new cases filed, we have interview within 6 months. In another case, we have pending for 7 years that hasn't been scheduled, but another one for 6 years uh, that are getting scheduled now. All right. Okay. So the short answer, after all this explanation, is that once you file asylum cases now, the backlog, you never know. It can be scheduled for an interview within 6 months, or it can fall into that backlog. How it's going to be cleared, nobody knows. The USCIS needs significantly more resources and officers to be able to clear that backlog. Okay. Now, one of the things that you can do, again, to improve your case, and I know this, that affects how soon your case will be scheduled for an interview, is making your case complete, meaning file everything. Don't just file a naked application for asylum and then hope that they'll call you for the interview and you will come to the interview with, 50 documents. No, that is one of the reasons they will throw your case into the backlog and probably push it down as much as possible, because they see either it's baseless case or it's or that your file is not complete. So make sure that you prepare and file everything all at once. And if you already filed a naked application due to somebody's advice, so it's not late to supplement. And that's actually one of the ways we use to try to expedite the case, not in a sense where there are bases for expediting, but what we do is we supplement the case, complete the file, and in that, when we file that in that package, we indicate that now this completes everything. We filed everything. We're ready for the interview. Please, if you have a window opening, consider this case. And sometimes it works, because once you file all these documents, they have to pull your file and put the information. I mean, again, that's my understanding of the procedure. And sometimes it does trigger, and I get officers contact me and say, oh, we have interview 2 weeks from now. Not so much lately, but it has been happening in the past couple of years, where I get calls and I'm informed that there is a window, and if we want to take that case, that interview date, then they'll be happy to schedule. Okay. All right. The next one. Hello from Cameroon. Hello to Cameroon. Cameroonians, as you all know, qualified for TPS, and it's been announced. And any Cameroonians who are in the United States before a certain date, don't have it from the top of my head, can file for TPS. All right. What else? If I arrived with a work visa, how can I change my employer? So if you arrived with a work visa, I assume by work visa what they mean is H-1B work visa. H-1B work visa allows you to change your employer as long as your employer files a new petition. So if you find a new employer, if you don't like your current employer, you can find a new employer. And it's easy. A lot of times people don't understand. They believe that it's involuntary servitude. They have to work as slaves for the employer who sponsored them for H-1B. That is not true. So if you find a new employer, the new employer can file a new petition, but they don't even have to wait for the decision. Once it's filed, you can change your employer and start your new job. So don't let the employers take advantage of you just because you're on H-1B. And I see that happening a lot, unfortunately. All right. Can the government take away my citizenship? Yes, there is a process. They have done this. They have actually announced it. And well, not that it was a new thing, but they tried to do it a lot more often during the Trump administration to scare everybody off. And they did it, and it happens. It's called denaturalization. So if there are strong basis for, to demonstrate that the way the applicant or foreign national became a citizen was through fraud and through clear misrepresentation of information, then there is a process for denaturalization. So that, okay. I was offered the job in the US. What kind of visa do I need? Depends on what type of job, depends on your qualifications. So the types of visas can vary. It can, depending on the job and your qualifications. It could be work visa, H-1B. It could be permanent residency. Now, the problem with permanent residency through employment, it takes a long time, about 2 years or so, until you'll be able to come into the US. And rarely employer is going to sit and wait for 2 years until you are able to come into the US, and you may come in and never work for that employer. So that's a bit risky for that employer to sponsor you. Then there is also H-2Bs, which is seasonal employees. Then there is E2, investor visa, if you're going to be working for your own business, starting your own business, or if you have a business in the US that is owned by a national of the same country that you are, and they can qualify that business as an E2 business, and they can bring you as E2 employee to that business. Okay. If one is accused of doing blasphemy in the country which have severe laws for those people, is it a strong base to claim asylum? Well, depends on there are too many factors that would affect. Typically, avoiding prosecution is not basis for asylum. Now, if that country has laws which are, inhumane punishment, which call for inhumane punishment, or severe, as I said, inhumanly severe punishment for small violations, then that could be the basis for relief under Convention Against Torture. But asylum requires persecution, not prosecution. And like in the United States, some of the states now legalized weed, marijuana, and it was illegal before. So should we say that smoking marijuana is a freedom, which, if somebody or being a pothead is a particular social group, and if somebody is being prosecuted for smoking weed, should they be eligible? Probably not. So, some countries made this. I mean, every country is entitled, just like every state, to decide what's legal, what's not, as long as it doesn't violate your fundamental rights, such as religion, nationality, race, political opinion, religious beliefs, and membership in a particular social group. Okay, for seeking asylum, based on domestic violence, what is your rate cost for representing me, please? I cannot give you quotes over the live stream. I don't know about your case, anything, how the details of it, how complicated, and where the case is, what it will entail. So there is no one size fit all price for asylum cases, as you can imagine. So to be able to get a quote for your case, you would need to contact our law firm, schedule a consultation. Our consultations are paid, but it gets credited back when you hire our firm. And then if you talk to me, then I will give you answers, and I will learn about your case, and I will tell you how much it's going to cost if you decide that you want me to represent you in your asylum case and you want our law firm to handle your case. All right, and you can contact us, obviously, since you're watching this channel, you see the contact information. I have my asylum interview next month. What should I expect? I can speak English, but not that fluent, and a little hesitant to give interview in English. What if I'm not able to convey properly? Very, very good question. I read what you wrote. I feel like you are fluent enough in English if you type this up. if you can understand what I'm saying, you are fluent in English enough for an asylum interview. I don't think you need an interpreter. It's just my opinion based on what that you're understanding me, and and you typed this question. But it's a very important aspect, very important question. There is this wrong notion that go to the asylum interview with an interpreter. They kind of expect you to have an interpreter and so on. No, that's not true. Asylum interviews are better without translators, without interpreters. If you can convey things in English and you don't have to use legal terminology, you can always tell the officer to speak slower or to repeat the question. I mean, of course, without annoying the officer. If you don't, if you're not going to understand the officer, or not be able to speak then in English, then maybe you should have an interpreter. But it's better to not use an interpreter. First, interpreters, you all know the phrase lost in translation. Things get lost in translation. Emotions get lost in translation. Tone gets lost in translation. You may, answer a question saying, I'm not sure, but I think it was July of 2021, but the translator is going to translate July 2021, not because it's a bad translator, but because they're under a lot of pressure and they don't understand the importance of the part when you said, I'm not sure, but, so that part may not be translated. So there's a lot of downsides of having a translator. Your interview is going to take longer. The officer is going to be more frustrated when you have a translator. I've had interviews where translators were disqualified and we had to reschedule an interview. There was time when, USCIS we had to bring our translator, and the USCIS had a phone monitor who would monitor it, and I had translators argue and fight over the phone with each other where the interview had to be canceled. I guess what I'm trying to say is that forget about using legal language. If you can understand me now, if you can speak to the level where you can convey what you wanted to convey without necessity of using legal language or fancy words and so on, then don't have a translator. Now, there is also an option. You can have a translator, but you can insist that this translator doesn't translate and only stands on standby in case if you need. Now, some of the officers I've heard said, no, you either use it or not, but then better not if they make you use it because the officer. But I don't see the reason why not. I mean, I've done this many times, even in court, in immigration courts. So the next question by the same person is asked, what should I expect on my interview? My recommendation is go online. Actually, USCIS has its own publication about the asylum interview, what to expect, but also on our website, I.S.Law Firm.com. Actually, what I will do is I will post that. Let me see if I can find an asylum interview preparation guide. So I have published it to how to prepare for an asylum interview. I will post that link here in the chat, and hopefully you can see that and review that, and that's going to be very important. It's going to be very important. Very helpful. I'm sorry, I think I typed something else. Okay, here it is. So click that link and look how to prepare for asylum interview. But again, if you can afford to hire a lawyer, a competent lawyer who's going to prepare and attend the interview with you. Interview is I would say, the most important. I mean, every part of asylum case is important, beginning from preparing the application or declaration, but the interview is when you actually talk to the officer, convince the officer, answer the questions, make sure that the officer takes all the notes properly. And so be very well prepared for the interview. Do you think getting asylum in 2024, as in 2024, Trump is going to take over the office, would affect asylum approval? Well, first of all, if you ask my opinion, I don't think Trump is going to take over in 2024. But, even if he does, we had 4 years of Trump administration. Generally, the Trump administration, Trump himself and, his Nazi assistant who was that Stephen Miller, although they were very anti-immigrant. And by Nazi, what I mean is it's not a slur. This guy was actually Stephen Miller, who was Trump's advisor on all these immigration policies, was actually on Nazi websites and was writing Nazi propaganda about hatred towards immigrants and so on. So, anyways, but even they couldn't do much. I mean, I've noticed during the Trump administration, I've noticed actually overcompensation by some of the asylum officers. So sometimes we would go to the asylum interview or immigration courts, and I felt like more like they're trying to overcompensate and they're actually making things easier because no matter who's the president or who's the attorney general or DHS secretary, they're not the ones who are actually sitting and interviewing or reviewing. Of course, Trump's attorney general Sessions and William Barr, they made some very damaging precedents, which thankfully now have been overruled by the current attorney general. But they've made some precedent decisions to actually tighten the asylum laws to reduce the chances, to make it difficult, for example, for the victims of domestic violence, the family members of individuals who have been targeted. So the family was no longer an automatic particular social group and so on. But thankfully, Attorney General Garland overruled a lot of those decisions. And some of the decisions actually during the Trump administration were overruled by the federal courts, the federal circuit courts, and the Supreme Court. Unfortunately, not so much help from the Supreme Court, but some of the federal circuit courts have overruled lots of the policies of the Trump administration. So no, I wouldn't tie or put all my hopes in the administration when you are applying for immigration benefits and so on. Of course, it has some effect, but but I guess what I'm trying to say, some of the officers that had prejudices against immigrants, they took advantage during the Trump administration and felt empowered to be mean. The others didn't change anything in their attitude or discretion. And some others were actually trying to compensate for those mean officers. Because, many of these things like asylum applications, it's not a straightforward exact science. There is lots of discretion on the officers and judges to rule one way or another. So if the judge is predisposed to rule against a certain type of case, they probably will do so, whether it's Trump who's the president, Biden, or Pope is the president. So it doesn't really matter as much as many people think. I am 18 years old, and if I seek asylum, what is the rates to win asylum? Well, the age doesn't matter. We've had asylum granted to 15-year-old, 16-year-old, up to 88 years old. I believe I represented an asylum case. What else? If I arrive, well, okay, that. What makes okay? Trying to find. There's a message that is retracted. Is there any change, any difference if I seek asylum in different states? Yes, there is. As I tried to explain in the beginning, there is obviously, there are conservative states, there are liberal states, and in the states, in the immigration courts and the officers, since they come from the pool of individuals living in that state, so it does have some effect. But again, I wouldn't put all my hopes and eggs in one basket. It's not the state you choose, it's not the officer who's handling your case, it's the essence and the the facts and the factors of your case, specific circumstances of your case that are most important. So I've had asylum granted by judges who had like 3% approval ratings. I've had asylum granted by, officers that, seemingly were from that negative type of pool of officers or in the conservative states. I guess what I'm trying to say is that it does play somewhat role, but it's not as much as for you to waste your resources and efforts and focus on as much as many people believe or make others believe. So focus as much as you can on the facts, preparation, and representation and proper presentation of your case, rather than the state or the judge or the officer. All right, the next question I have: can I seek asylum right at the airport in USA? Yes, you can. You can seek asylum as long as you are in USA, whether at the airport or at the border at the checkpoint. What you cannot do is you cannot seek asylum outside of the US. So there is no procedure for asylum consideration at the U.S. consulates or embassies. Otherwise, the embassies in many countries would be lined up with asylum applicants, and all they would do is be considering asylum applicants. So it's not practically possible. Now, you may have seen in the movies or heard that somebody was granted asylum in the embassy or held in the embassy, or the U.S. government actually took somebody from the country of their persecution, brought them to the U.S. and granted asylum. But those are very specific and unusual circumstances where the U.S. government has specific interest in granting asylum or protecting this person individual. So, but the regular asylum application, there is no such a thing as applying abroad through embassy, consulate, and so on. Now, abroad, the only way you can end up in the U.S. as a refugee is through the UNHCR Refugee Resettlement Program, which is also known as IOM program. That takes several years. You apply, you go through the process, then you get camped in some other third country before you actually finally get resettled in the United States or some other country. So I believe the United States now reinstated about 50,000 refugees through that program every year. The Trump administration reduced it and then canceled, but then the Biden administration reinstated this. So the United States annually takes about 50,000 or so refugees verified by the United Nations Higher Commission for Refugees, UNHCR, that goes through the verification interview and so on, and then vetting. And so the US, as many other countries do, accepts those refugees. So that's the only way from abroad. Are Michigan and New Jersey a liberal state? That changes, varies. I guess New Jersey, yes, but Michigan, yeah. I mean, there is no, again, it's not, there is no red and blue necessarily in immigration cases. I mean, let me tell you this: Texas, for example, is a red state, right? Now, there is a movement to make it a blue state, Democratic state versus Democratic state versus Republican. But I've had great success in asylum cases in Houston, Texas. So, but you can say Houston is probably blue versus other parts of Texas. Anyway, there is no such a thing really, that it's liberal or not. Yeah, I guess New Jersey is more liberal than Michigan. Michigan is more liberal than, I don't know, Florida, for example. Depends on the parts of Florida and so on. Okay, I think this was the last question. There may be more questions. If you have questions, you can always contact us and we will do more live streams. I actually enjoyed it. It's 59 minutes now. So thank you everybody who watched, who joined, and who will be watching this afterwards. As I said, it is the day before Thanksgiving. And I wish happy Thanksgiving to everyone. Thanksgiving is a traditional holiday in the United States where we, many of you probably know, we eat turkey and express our gratitude to things that we have, basically being thankful. So it's a very good holiday, and I hope everybody spends their holiday with their families. Everybody enjoys the long weekend, and thank you so much again for listening. So subscribe to our channel. Also, please hit like. Thank you. Bye-bye.